Say, after a series of vacations and travels and other things, it was great to have our whole worship band back up here this morning. Listening to them rehearse before you all arrived, I've got all those songs stuck in my head, and I'm grateful for the gifts that they share with us. So, fun Pastor David fact, I am a sucker for a good rom-com. And one of the best ever, right, is When Harry Met Sally, that first Nora Ephron movie. And near the beginning of the movie, Harry admits something unusual about himself to this woman he has just met, Sally. He explains to her, "When I buy a new book, I always read the last page first, just in case I die before I finish it, so I will know how it ends." Which is funny, and perhaps also a little true about us and about our lives, because we care deeply about endings. We want to know, do the good guys win? Do they fall in love? Does hope last? How does it end? And honestly, there are a lot of people in the world right now who have become convinced that the ending will not be good. The world feels heavy. Wars rage, politics divide, the planet groans, people are lonely, communities are fractured, and we are exhausted. We are overwhelmed. And beneath all of it is this quiet fear that I hear as I sit down with people one-on-one. What if it doesn't get any better? What if this is as good as it gets? A lot of people have quietly decided that this is just how the world works. This is it. Violence is inevitable, division is permanent, cynicism is seen as wisdom. In the words of the philosopher, this life is just nasty, brutish, and short, and you might as well get used to it. What a tragic way to live your life. What a sad ending to expect from it all. In fact, there are even people of faith who have taught themselves to hope for destruction. People of faith who see war and division and chaos and think to themselves from their pulpits out loud, maybe this is what God wants. Maybe this is all a part of God's plan, and so they cheer on the wars. They cheer on the violence. They cheer on the hatred and division, all in God's name. How hopeless it must be to believe in a God like that. Because in the book of Revelation, chapter 21, God says otherwise. The final dream of God for this world is not devastation and destruction. The final dream of God is renewal, not escape. The story is not that God abandons the world. The story is not God abandons creation. The story that is in God's final vision for the world, the last page of it reads like this: "Look, I am making all things new." So we find it near the last page of our Bibles. It's not, "I am destroying everything so that I can replace it." It's not, "I'm taking you good people out of everything before it gets worse." It's, "I am making all things new." And the deal is, when we know how the story ends, we live differently in the middle. We know the last page. We know Christ is risen. We know, yes, death is real, but death does not get the last word. For hope renews all things. So I know the book of Revelation has a reputation. It's one of my favorite books, but it's not a lot of people's favorite book. People hear Revelation and they think dragons and beasts, weirdness and fires, charts and conspiracy theories, and somebody on YouTube with too much free time and access to the internet. But the Bible does not end with chaos. The Bible ends with a city, a garden city, in fact. Our book begins and ends with a garden, and that's no accident. Gardens are where we find life. This holy city, this garden city, comes down from heaven. Do you ever notice that? That's the movement of the book of Revelation. It's the movement of the whole gospel is downward. In the book of Revelation, in all of the gospel, in all of the New Testament, the movement is from God toward us. God comes here. Creation is not discarded. Creation is restored. Creation is renewed and redeemed. Isaiah saw this coming centuries earlier. Revelation is actually quoting from the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah saw people building houses and living in them. He saw people planting vineyards and eating their fruit. He saw children thriving. He saw peace. The lion lays down with the lamb. He saw peace flowing through creation itself. And then Paul in Romans 8 says it this way. Creation, all of creation is groaning. I feel like we know that groan. You can hear it in hospital rooms. You can hear it in headlines and in tired marriages and in anxious hearts. You can hear groaning under violence, groaning under greed, groaning under suffering, groaning under death. All of creation groans. But Paul says, this is not death pains. This is not that rattle of death, that last breath escaping the body. These are instead labor pains, birth pains. This is life returning to the body. Something new is being born. Something exciting is just around the corner, and that, church, matters. Christian hope is not that one day God will save a few souls and throw away the rest. Thanks be to God. Christian hope is God is healing the whole world. God is restoring the whole world. It is God saying, look, I am making, which things? All things. I am making all things new. All things. And it's not just the world out there. The creation and the trees and the interactions. God heals the worlds inside of us as well. Because there's brokenness everywhere. And just as there is brokenness in the nations and in our cultures, there is brokenness in us, in our hearts. Some of us walked in here carrying grief that nobody else can see. Somebody here is exhausted and overwhelmed. Someone is lonely. Somebody is carrying shame. Somebody is wondering if they can survive another week of this. Somebody is trying to rebuild their life after a broken relationship, or addiction, or depression, or loss, or failure. There is brokenness in our lives and in our hearts. And the promise of the resurrection is not, hey, just pretend it never happened. Smile and be glad. Remember, the risen Jesus still has scars. The wounds are still there, but the wounds no longer define the future. That is resurrection. Not erased wounds, but redeemed wounds. Not ignored wounds, but healed wounds. God bringing life where once death ruled. God bringing peace where once violence ruled. God bringing hope where despair ruled. Christ is risen and death is real, but death does not get the last word. Hope renews all things. And so really, this Easter story is one that we've been telling all season long. We talked about how hope rises, the tomb is empty, and the worst thing in our lives is not the last thing. Still we rise. We talked about how hope walks beside us through the valleys of the shadow of death, and Christ meets us on the road of life. We talked about how hope builds community. In a lonely and fragmented world, hope binds us together because faith is a team sport. We're talking about how hope heals. How the risen Christ returns not with vengeance, but with peace. Peace be with you. Shalom. And now, hope renews all things. The whole story has been moving over these last 6 weeks toward restoration this whole time. An example, an early teacher in the church was a guy named Origen. And Origen did most of his work in a small seaside town called Caesarea Maritima in Palestine. And Origen used this great word at the center of his thought, apokatastasis. Easy for me to say, right? Apokatastasis. It's a good one. You play this and you're winning at Scrabble. What's that? When an apple changes shape? No. Apokatastasis means restoration. We hear it in Acts when the disciples are preaching and they say, we hope for the apokatastasis of all things, the renewal of all things. Or echoed in what we heard from Revelation today, that, look, I am making all things new. I am restoring all things. This is exactly what Revelation is talking about. What this idea means has been the subject of some debate, but for Origen it was clear. The last page of God's novel for the world, the final reveal, is healing, restoration, renewal. He once wrote, the end is always like the beginning. The end is always like the beginning. Or, as the theologians in Semisonic once said, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Or to state it even more clearly, the God who lovingly created the world will not abandon the world. The God who lovingly created humanity will not abandon humanity. The God who lovingly created you will never abandon you. Origen pointed us towards something profound, that God is determined to overcome evil without becoming evil, not defeating hatred with more hatred, or vengeance with more vengeance, or violence with greater violence, but instead through healing, through restoration, through reconciliation, through resurrection comes the victory of God. Doesn't that feel deeply relevant right now? We live in a world that is addicted to punishment, to meeting hatred with greater hatred and violence with greater violence, that is addicted to humiliation and retaliation, addicted to revenge and vengeance. Everybody wants somebody to pay for what's going wrong. And the book of Revelation imagines for us something else. Not the triumph of revenge, but the victory of renewal. God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Folks, every tear. Not ignore the tears, not explain away the tears, not pretend it didn't happen. But God will wipe away every tear. That is tenderness. You have someone in your life who wipes away the tears. God will wipe away every tear. That is compassion. That is who our God is. God will wipe away every tear. That is the future of our God and our world. And this is important. God doesn't call us to wait around passively for heaven, but instead the calling of the church is this: to live as if our resurrection is already true. To become the sort of people who make the world look a little bit more like God describes in Revelation 21. More mercy, more welcome, more courage, more healing, more hope. What is the church? Who are we as we look toward the future of this world that God's made, the church is a people who practice for God's future. It's important enough to say again. The church is a people who practice now for God's future. One of my favorite authors, N.T. Wright, said, "What you do in the present is a part of God's future." I love that. We are the people now. We are the people now who repair instead of destroy. We are the people who forgive instead of retaliate. We are the people who welcome instead of exclude. We are the people who build community in a culture of division. In a world filled with warmongers, the church, the resurrection church, is a community of hope mongers. We show the world now, today, what the last page of God's book is going to look like for the world. We show our neighbors what God's renewal and restoration looks like. Every act of mercy that we carry out becomes a declaration. Death does not get the final word. So yes, the world is wounded. And yes, our lives are sometimes broken and wounded as well. But in Revelation, God gives us the last page of the story, and the ending is not despair, not destruction, not abandonment. The ending is renewal, apokatastasis. When the world says to us, nothing changes, this is just how it's going to be, God says instead, I am making all things new. When the world says violence wins, hatred wins, power wins, God says, death shall be no more. Love wins. When the world says people never heal, never get better, God says mourning and crying and pain shall be no more. I raise wounded people from the dead. Look, behold, I am making all things new. Friends, God is renewing this world. God is renewing this church. God is renewing your life. Even now, God is doing the work of restoration, of renewing mercy, renewing courage, renewing community, renewing reconciliation. And if we pay attention, we will catch glimpses of that renewal breaking through into our world today. And if we have courage, real resurrection courage, if we have courage, then we get to participate in God's renewal today. We get to be a part of God's work in the world today. Alleluia, Christ is risen. Yeah, death is real. Good Friday is real. But death does not get the last word, because hope renews all things, and God is making all things new.